All of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The big G6-ish 7 summit. I guess Trump's leaving a little early. Gotta cut out, get that round of golf in before the hair summit pops up. And if you look at the early pictures coming out of there, wow, doesn't he look out of place? The one image they showed is nobody was even talking to him. And it's not funny. I mean, just not funny at all. And we'll get into some of that today. Just lots on the agenda with this administration. But they're going to start off with a quote from Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts. She was being interviewed for one of the Intercept podcasts, and she basically came out and said, look, until we have all of the Democrats who are willing to take on the billionaire class, until we have all of the Democrats who are willing to fight for the American people and not a handful of billionaires and giant corporations, that it's going to stay an uphill fight. She was asked if she agreed with Bernie Sanders' that assertion that the Democrats just don't have the guts. And she agreed. Just don't have the guts to take on Wall Street. And sadly, I mean, with money being a central focus of most campaigns, ask anybody who runs for office. The first question they have to ask themselves is, can I raise enough money to compete? That's our problem. Our problem is they're, sorry, like it or not, campaigns are about lots of money, and the billionaire class has all of the money. And we as voters, we haven't repelled that. And, I think back to my grandparents' generation. I guess it's because, they lived through the Great Depression. They lived through an era that, the billionaire class caused. This absolute greed, all of the speculation, all of that caused by their insatiable appetite for more. And their generation was skeptical of extreme wealth and voted against it fairly often. And, because I always think back to something he always told me. He said, look, if a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you don't need something, you better spend two to get it, because they understand return on investment. And I got to wonder what he would look at today in the politics that we have at the Koch brothers spending, reports being somewhere between $400 million and $800 million, up to $1 billion on this election cycle. And you go, they've got to want their money back. They're not philanthropists. It's not just into charity. They get something, and this is the other part. They always get something for their charity. They give colleges and universities some charitable contributions, and what do they want in response? What do they want in return? They want say on who's hired in the economics department, so that they can train a generation of minds to think that the way they do. So until, the Democrats, and until we, and I'm not blaming only the Democrats, but until, we repel the Wall Street money and the big money campaigns, I don't know what happens. But that's what it's got to come down to. Now, people say, well, why are you a Democrat? I go, well, because, they're not completely wholly owned subsidiary of the billionaire class. Some are, absolutely. I absolutely agree that money is a huge problem. But if you look at the Republican Party, they have been the party of lockstep, being led around the nose by the billionaire class. That old saying, you can't herd cats. Well, they figured out how to herd the Republican cats. They give them lots of money. And then you don't ever burn the billionaire class because, look, once you're out of office, you're going to want a job. And they always get nice, cushy jobs after they leave, don't they? And they always pay a lot more than they made in Congress. So they know whose hand not to bite. And it's that of the one that feeds them. So it is not surprising to me one little bit. The Republican Party has not been the party of profiles in courage for a very long time. But over at Huffington Post, Arthur Delaney, somebody we've had on the program a number of times, and a couple of other folks have written an article asking what the House Republicans would do if Donald Trump pardoned himself. And they went and asked all 235 Republican representatives, and surprisingly, I mean, really surprisingly, one said he would pursue impeachment. I'm literally shocked that one said, and I know one. I mean, I'm amazed. One. Not that it's so low, that it's that high, that there was actually one that was willing to say, yeah, I'd pursue impeachment. Now, just 3 gave an answer one way or another. Stop and think about this for a second. Out of 235 representatives, only 3 gave an actual answer. Justin Amash from Michigan said no. He was the one, I guess, willing to step forward and say no. He was the one that said yes. He was the one who would pursue impeachment if Trump pardoned himself. The other 2 said no. Now, there have been a number of other representatives asked, and they all fell back on the, not a constitutional scholar. Mark Warner, the Republican from North Carolina, they said hid behind ignorance, saying, I don't want to brag, but I'm not a lawyer. Not funny, but, this is how they're used to answering things. According to the report, 3 Republicans, Leonard Lance of New Jersey, who's probably going to lose his seat, Brian Fitzpatrick here of Pennsylvania, who I'm hoping loses his seat, and Walter Jones of North Carolina, they said that they didn't think the president had the authority to pardon themselves, but all of them then avoided the impeachment question. So there's what you had. And there was one Republican who said that the president had the authority to pardon himself. And you may remember him as Joe "You Lie" Wilson. And when I saw that, I started thinking about, I wonder during the Obama years, what Joe "You Lie" Wilson would have said if Obama was going to pardon himself or anybody in his cabinet. I got to wonder what he'd be screaming out. Just kind of throwing that out there because, it's really bizarre to me that he would be a guy who would be saying, yeah, I think he can pardon himself. Now, my favorite line in the whole story, and I suggest you take a look at it, it's pretty interesting. They write, although many Republicans said they couldn't answer the question based on their limited knowledge of the limited constitutional knowledge, others said they wouldn't answer it because it was hypothetical. Now, my favorite part of this is they have now come out. Now, remember, these are the people who carry the Constitution in their pocket right here. They're the ones who are screaming that they're the party of the Constitution. They're the people who are the defenders of the Constitution. Yet they have limited knowledge of it. I mean, come on. The hypocrisy, the idiocy, really? You're going to take that? Well, I don't really know, but I love the Constitution. I don't know anything about it. It's like those Bible people who, we need to read the Bible. Have you ever read it? No, but I've heard stories about it. Oh. So the hypothetical question they didn't want to answer, and they didn't have any knowledge of it. And good on the Democrats here for not wasting any time in demanding a vote to say, what are Trump's pardon powers? Can he issue clemency for anyone tied up in the Mueller investigation? Can he go and pardon any of those folks? Can Manafort be pardoned? Can Gates be pardoned? Can Flynn be pardoned? Can Papadopoulos be pardoned? Can any of them? Can Junior be pardoned when we go after him? Can Kush get out of jail free? I don't know. The proposal put forth today by Ted Lieu, the Democrat from California, and Bill Pascrell from New Jersey, would say the Justice Department would have to produce any documents, any record, any audio recordings, any memorandums, anything whatsoever that might lead the Justice Department to think that it is okay for Donald Trump to use his power of the pardon for himself or for people who Mueller has indicted and pursuing against him. Because I got to be honest with you, it's really bizarre to me that we as a country wouldn't immediately be going, wait a second, these are his people. He should not have the authority to be able to pardon the people under his name with his crimes. Now, I know Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon and all of that. That's a kind of a different scenario. No one accused Ford of colluding with Nixon. So this just seems really, really very twisted to me. And it's, I don't know. I'm struggling to find the rationale for us not as a country being more outraged by this. And Republicans, seriously, you really need to take your party back somewhere near sanity. The fact that only one, and he's a way out libertarian from up in Michigan. Only one Republican was willing to say, yeah, that if he did it, we would pursue impeachment. Now you did have Speaker Ryan this week come out and say that that he didn't know the answer to the question of can he pardon himself? Again, the party of the Constitution. But he said, I think obviously the answer is he shouldn't be able to. No one is above the law. And for me, that's the premise in all of this, that no one is above the law. Everyone should be held accountable, especially the people that we put into the highest offices. If we cannot trust the person sitting in that Oval Office, if we can't trust the person leading this country, what is it going to do to the credibility of that office globally? And you look at what's going on right now as we speak, we are basically the laughing stock of the globe. In that, if you watched some of the video from today, it is just, everyone kind of snubbed him. He was like the kid who, maybe didn't shower. And maybe he didn't. I don't know. Now, to finish this up, Rudy Giuliani said that he says he guarantees that Trump's not gonna pardon anyone. It's not gonna happen. In fact, Giuliani gave his word and the president's word. Now, I do find it interesting that Giuliani's word not so credible. After he said that he knew that Melania Trump didn't believe Stormy Daniels and that believed in her husband. And her office issued a statement that basically said, Rudy doesn't know what I believe at all. Basically, Rudy should shut up. Speaking out of school, which, I took as kind of, Melania believes Stormy. So that can be very interesting. Anyway, lots to get to today. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the Equal Rights Amendment that's being pushed right now. This week, a lot of activity on it. So when we come back, Maureen Shaw is going to be here, writer and opinion journalist, to share some of her thoughts. And we'll bang around a couple of ideas around that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. The talk.
90% of the wealth. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day the Granite Mountain and Speculator mines in Butte, Montana caught fire, killing 168 miners. It is considered the worst underground hard rock mining disaster in the nation's history. Just weeks after the U.S. had entered World War I, the demand for copper had surged. Granite Mountain, like many of the nation's mines, operated around the clock to meet war production needs. In his book, Fire and Brimstone, The North Butte Mining Disaster of 1917, Michael Punke notes the irony of the disaster, which began as an effort to improve safety. A sprinkler system had just been installed. The final task was the relocation of an electrical cable. The cable was insulated with oil-soaked cloth sheathed in lead. Workers lost control of the 3-ton cable as they lowered it into the mine, and it fell to the bottom of the shaft. Carrying a commonly used carbide-burning lamp, the night shift foreman accidentally ignited the cable as he planned its removal. The conflagration was virtually immediate and burned for more than 3 days. At the time, 415 miners were at work on the overnight shift. Smoke and gases quickly filled both mines. With no alarm system in place, those that could not escape succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning. In 1996, a memorial plaza was dedicated to those who lost their lives. It details a slice of Butte's mining and labor history that culminated in tragedy.
The suffering and the pain we remember to this day. The
Labor History at 2, brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
He's going the distance. He's going for speed. She's all alone.
So it's been 46 years since Congress originally passed the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, and still we remain at this hour one state short of ratification. As you may remember, Illinois just recently moved us one step closer. And this week you had Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney and actress Alyssa Milano on Capitol Hill pushing for its final passage. And here to share some thoughts on the amendment and what we need to be doing to move this forward, I've asked Maureen Shaw to come talk with us. She is a respected writer and opinion journalist. Maureen, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
I am good. You know, I'm curious. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a good thing? Is this now the time to be moving this forward?
It should have been time, 3 decades ago. Yes, this is actually fantastic news. As you just mentioned, Illinois became the 37th of the 38 states required to ratify it on May 31st. And we need one more state to step up to the plate. And it looks like Virginia is going to be the state that activists are targeting next to be the final state needed to ratify it.
Now, I was going to ask, who do we focus on? Who do we beat up on now?
So of the, I believe it's now 13 states that haven't ratified it. Most of them are in the very deep South.
Gee, I'm surprised.
Shocker, I know. But Virginia is one of them. And seeing that Virginia has moved from very much a deep red state to more of a purple state, I think it's giving us hope that Virginia has a good chance of stepping up to the plate.
It just seems to me that it should pass, since women are the majority. I mean, there are more women than are men, and if they would just vote, maybe we would have more of a sane kind of politics. You know, I've been saying for a long time, I'm ready for women to take over, because look, they can't do any worse than men have done. So let's give it a shot.
Well, it's not for lack of trying. There's certainly not equal representation in all levels of politics, which is what we need in order to pass these types of laws. So, I'm always a proponent of, voting for women so long as they're the right women.
So you wouldn't want
Sarah
someone
Palin.
like Phyllis Schlafly to be running things, because, and the reason I bring her up is, her claim to fame is she's the reason that the Equal Rights Amendment didn't actually pass.
I know. And what's interesting is I have these conversations quite frequently. My family's very conservative. I'm kind of the lone liberal sheep here. And my parents are very much like of the mindset, oh, this woman, was just going to be the head of the CIA. Isn't that great? Well, I love seeing women come into leadership positions, but she's not the right woman per se. And it goes back to even when Sarah Palin was a vice presidential candidate, same story, just not the right woman.
No, I look at the woman who's, now the head of the CIA, kind of blows my whole theory that women would be a little saner and maybe not so much of war hawkish and warmongers and doing horrible things. I mean, she was, part of the torture stuff. So it kind of blows that mother nurturing kind of theory right out of the water.
Right. Well, I mean, you don't have to necessarily be a mothering, nurturing woman to be a right woman. But by all means, I don't agree with her politics and approach to things like torture, for example.
Right.
But getting back to your original question, I think, we really just need more of the right women lifted up and elected into office. Right now is a historic moment. More women than ever are running for office in this country, from the hyper-local level to the federal level. So you never know what the midterms might bring. This might be our year for the ERA.
Well, I mean, you're running for something, right?
I am indeed. I am running for my local town council.
And, everyone needs to, I've been saying this for a while, you run for, especially those positions, because those are the ones that affect your life most certainly every day. President, not so much every day, but your local dog catcher, your local town council, your local inspectors, those are the jobs those are the ones that affect you every single day.
You're absolutely right. In the case of my town, there has not been a Democrat on the governing body since 1973.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Where in New Jersey do you live?
I'm in Allendale, New Jersey, which is only 20 miles from the city, from New York City. So it's kind of a conservative pocket, but more and more Democrats are kind of coming out of the woodwork. So, and a lot of that I think is spurred by what's happening at the national level. People are just not happy. And we're seeing even locally some, registered Republicans are really becoming open to hearing what Democrats have to say.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was just reading something the other day. It said New Jersey may not have a Republican in their congressional delegation. That's how far it's gone.
Yeah. We lived 8 years under Chris Christie, and now we have Governor Phil Murphy, who, his first orders of business are sweeping gun control legislation, reinstating funding for Planned Parenthood, which Christie had decimated. So we're seeing this kind of revival of liberal progressive values in the state, which is really heartening.
Yeah, and I'm sure he won't close the Fort Lee exit to the George Washington Bridge.
No,
I got to be honest. I thought the perfect penalty for that would have been to take whoever was involved, drop them at the nearest truck stop, and if they got out alive, that was their punishment.
Let them walk home. Right?
If they could make it home, then they'd be okay. But let me ask you, going back to the ERA. Because I've had a bunch of people ask me, why do we need this? Why do we need something specific like this when you have the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that supposedly guarantees everyone, every citizen, equal protection under the law?
Right. So the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment first applied to sex discrimination only in 1971. And it's never been interpreted to grant equal rights on the basis of sex in a uniform and inclusive way that an Equal Rights Amendment would. The 14th Amendment was obviously implemented well before the 19th Amendment, which guarantees women the right to vote. So surely it was not designed and meant to apply for women or to women. And something else to keep in mind is the Equal Protection Clause of, the 14th Amendment only applies to state and local governments. It is not a federally enshrined protection.
Okay.
There's so many reasons, why we would need an ERA. It would clarify sex discrimination jurisprudence. It would give a strong legal defense against rollback of advances in women's rights that have been achieved in the last, 50 years, which we're seeing are being chipped away at left and right by this administration.
Oh, and the Republican Party as a whole. I tell my daughters, I tell my oldest daughter all the time, look, I have two daughters, and I want equal opportunity for them. I want them to be able to go as far as their talents will take them, without being harassed or intimidated or pushed down. But I keep telling her that, look, there's a movement in this country to move you back to barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. And it's not just taking away your right to choose. It's taking your right to birth control away, your right to vote away. It's all of that stuff.
But that movement is coming head to head with what I think is an even stronger movement, which is the Me Too movement. And women have just had it. I think this is the first time. I've been an activist and a feminist for as long as I can remember, and this is the first time I feel like this is moving forward at exponential speed compared to movements in the past, where it's usually, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Right.
This, I feel like we're just marching ahead, and collectively, we just, I think, have gotten to the point of raising each other up and empowering each other is taking precedence, which is moving this Me Too movement and women's rights ahead, even though we're facing an onslaught from the GOP and the Trump administration.
Yeah, I hope you're right. Because look, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and and she wants to be a chef. Her, that's her passion. And so we got her
awesome.
An internship with the local chef here, who's internationally recognized, and it's one of the top restaurants in the area. And she's been working there, and she came home and told my wife that some guys like my age and older, are hitting on her and rubbing her arm and asking her for her phone number. And I said, you should give them a phone number, give them mine. I'd be happy to set up a date. But I'm like, she shouldn't have to put up with this, to pursue her passions. And as we talk to people, you find out that in the chef world, in that world, in food service and all that, sexual harassment is just rampant. And
it's everywhere.
And it was one of these things where my daughter, as we were talking to her about it, she knew it was wrong. She wanted to stand up for herself. And in this moment of, I was kind of proud of her on one vein, and she wanted to push back, but she feared that if she did, it would harm the waitress's tip, who needed the money to take care of her kids. And so she put up with it and didn't say anything and just kind of let it go. And I'm like, no, your generation stops this. Your generation is the one that can change the world. Don't allow yourself to be put in that kind of stranglehold, or am I wrong?
No, you're right. It is very difficult. I've experienced sexual harassment in the workforce when I was younger, in my early 20s. And it can be frustrating because there are so many reasons not to say something from a very introspective, personal perspective. You don't want to lose your job. You don't want to make things worse for coworkers, your daughter's concerns. But now that I'm older and can step back and look at the bigger picture, it's vital to speak up and say something. Of course, I say that from the comfort of my, white middle class self, and everybody's very different. And there are certain factors that are going to influence a situation, whether that's, the industry you're in, if you're a migrant worker, for example, if you're a person of color, if you're, there's so many other factors that go into the type of harassment you might be facing on the job, whether or not you feel empowered and have a support network to stand up and say something. So it's, you know, I like to think and say, and I teach my daughter who's 5, to stand up and speak out no matter what, you know.
Yeah.
But again, that's easy for me to say because I do recognize I come from a certain place of privilege that others might not.
Yeah, I thought my wife had the best, as were my first reaction, you know, as any alpha male type mentality would be, is I just want to grab somebody and strangle them, which, you know, doesn't work, not all the time. But my wife said, you know, just hand them a menu and ask them where on the menu they find her, which I thought was kind of clever, kind of interesting.
That is very clever.
But, you know, it does come back to that. You know, she shouldn't have to tolerate it. Now, the question that I got when I did this, you know, I did this segment for our TV show, and I got a whole bunch of guys going, okay, well, where do we start drawing the line? Where is it, you know, is flirting no longer something that we allow? And where's the line between flirting and sexual harassment, or isn't there one? And this is one of those questions that I actually don't have an answer for. So I'm curious if you have a thought.
Oh boy, that's a tough one.
Because, you know, what the emails I got from people were, you know, I met my wife at work. And the one guy sticks out in my mind. He said, I met my wife at work. You know, we had been flirting with each other for months. In today's environment, he claims that would be considered sexual harassment. And I don't know if it is or it isn't. You know, I don't know the level of, you know, whatever that was. But, you know, it's an interesting question because I think we're at a time where, you know, most men want to be on the right side of this issue. Most men want to support their women. They want to make sure their daughters aren't harassed and intimidated. But they also look at themselves and go, you know, maybe am I guilty of some of this stuff? And, you know, where is this line for me even?
But that's a great first step. Even now that this has been raised in a collective consciousness for men, to stop and think, is this appropriate? Is this not appropriate? You might not get it 100% of the time, but the fact that you're stopping and thinking about it is a really good first step. And in terms of what that person who emailed you saying he met his wife at work and they were flirting, you know, that sounds consensual to me. And so you have to take it case by case a lot of times, but it's also important to look at power dynamics, right? If you're a 50-year-old chef and you're rubbing up on or flirting with a 16-year-old in your restaurant, that's clearly an abuse of a power dynamic and it's inappropriate. So looking at things like that, I think is important. It has to be contextualized, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that would warrant a beating and me being behind bars for a little while, but that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But, you know, it's one of these weird things. And, you know, I got a whole bunch of responses on this. You know, to where, you know, I've never actually asked a waitress for her phone number. I just never, you know, I never imposed like that because, you know, they're just doing a job. But some people have, and look, I know people who've actually gotten them. So it's this weird kind of world that I think we need to work through. And I think by having these conversations, as uncomfortable as they can be, I think is important.
Absolutely. To have that communication. And like I said, the fact that you're thinking about it, that alpha males are starting to think, oh, crap, have I done something like that? Am I engaging in that behavior now? That kind of introspection is really valuable.
And it's something I think
Truly.
that, you know, look, because none of us want our wives or our daughters or sisters or anyone harassed. You know, but, you know, as the one person said, I wish women would tell me what they want. And I don't know. You know, it's a weird kind of moment I think we're in. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it will be. I'm encouraged by it. There are going to be missteps. There's going to be stumbles on both sides. But I think, generally speaking, this is such a positive movement and positive momentum for women.
No, it's good stuff.
And I'm so glad that, you know, I have my daughter's almost 6. And I'm just so hopeful and thankful that this movement is happening when she's this little, because by the time my daughter's your daughter's age, I'm hoping that she won't have to face things like sexual harassment when she starts to work or things like that.
I hope
I mean,
so
it's
too.
a pipe dream, but
I hope
yeah.
I hope so too. Look, I had hoped my daughter wouldn't face it, but I give her credit for being mature enough to come to her mother and say, "Hey, this is going on," and for being mature enough, on all of this. So there's a bunch of this that, I'm proud of the job my wife has done in raising our daughter, to be a mature young woman. And so last question I have for you, because
Sure.
I'm sure there are a lot of people out there going, how do you handle those situations? Any advice on how, let's say my daughter handles that kind of a situation, how young women handle a situation where they're being harassed, maybe by people who are on an equal plane, not even people who are superior or have a power dynamic, but even people who are on an even plane. Any advice?
Absolutely. I think the first thing to do, whether it's a peer, a superior, or even, somebody who reports to you, to simply look that person in the face and say, "You're making me uncomfortable."
Pretty simple.
I mean, that's
pretty direct.
It's simple. It's direct. And if you need to, you can escalate it. I had a situation where my superior was sexually harassing me back in my early 20s, and I went to our boss and got no support there. So then I went to HR. You can just keep escalating it if it's appropriate and you're comfortable doing that. But I think a first good step is to simply, it's like a bully, when you're in school and somebody's bullying you, sometimes the best way to stop it is to confront it.
Yep, bully them back.
So,
I'm with you.
why wouldn't
I'm with you.
just be like,
Take 'em
hey,
out.
you're not. That's
No,
it's
look,
not
one of my
okay.
favorite moments. I had a friend. We were in a bar, and my friend reached over and he grabbed this girl, grabbed her behind, and she turned around and smacked him across his face so hard that left a mark. And we even if this is 35 years ago. If I saw him today, I would still remind him that she smacked him in the face and that he deserved it.
And that's actually another good point, is that if you are a bystander and you're witnessing sexual harassment or any kind of other unwanted type of behavior and advances, and you see that person who's, getting the brunt of it isn't comfortable but might not have that confidence to speak up, being a bystander who speaks his voice is also a really great way to be an ally.
There you go. Maybe you get up and you smack him. There's an even better idea.
I am not advocating smack.
I knew I liked you. Marina, I appreciate the time and the thoughts and all of that. I hope you'll come back and talk to me again as this continues, because I'm sure it's not going anywhere anytime soon. But we'd love to have you come back again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Good
Have a
stuff.
great rest of your night.
You as well. It was great talking with you, Maureen Shaw. Check out her stuff. If you want to follow her on Twitter, at Maureen Shaw, we'll get a link out to some of the things that she's done. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Time to talk.
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why we fight.
Finally, radio for the rest of us. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1904. That was the day that John Carley, a union miner, was shot down in Dunnville, Colorado. Carley was part of a strike in the Cripple Creek gold mining region. The miners had gone out on strike in support of workers at the Standard Mill in Colorado City, which processed the mined ore. Colorado Governor Peabody was determined to break the strike. He called in the state militia, who joined forces with company army gun thugs, with 1,000 rifles and 60,000 rounds of ammunition to back them up. General Sherman Bell, a veteran of Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Rider Squad in the Spanish-American War, led the National Guard. During the strike, one of General Bell's deputies is said to have declared, "To hell with the Constitution! We aren't going by the Constitution." This pretty much summed up General Bell's approach to the conflict. The militia began to round up Union miners. More than 1,500 miners were captured and given a so-called trial by the militia. 238 of these miners were then deported from the region. They were shipped by train to Denver, Kansas, and New Mexico, and warned not to return. The militia learned of a group of pro-union workers at a small encampment known as Dunville. General Bell loaded up more than 100 militiamen and company deputies on a train and headed for the camp. There they exchanged gunfire with the miners. 65 miners, armed with just 10 guns among them, had little chance against the well-armed company men. John Carley was killed, and 14 miners were arrested. The Union was crushed in the sights of 1,000 guns. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Question: what do you get when you combine ignorance?
Demanding the super rich to pay their fair share for once. The Rick Smith Show.
I got a bad case, sorted it up, it's getting cold in here, so file it up. I got a bad case, sorted it up.
So some new CBO numbers, Congressional Budget Office numbers out that are telling you just how bad the premium increases of the Affordable Care Act has been. They're looking at the benchmark average, the plan's average benchmark of 34% higher than it was in 2017. And go, gee, you wonder why that is. I would argue it's because you've got an administration that's doing everything they can do to destroy it. In fact, what the CBO has pointed out, that next year you're going to have about 34 million people uninsured, up from 30 million. So it's getting more expensive and fewer people are being insured. This is the perfect storm that the Trump administration wants. And as we talked about yesterday, the Justice Department is going to, I guess, not defend the law, hoping that John Roberts in the Supreme Court, which has already been decided, will I guess, redecide the individual mandate and the penalty. And the argument is since there's no penalty, it's a different fine, so they're going to relitigate it. Just kind of insane to me. And here to talk a little bit about where we're at, what's going on, I've asked Erin Neinhauser to come talk with us. She's with the Pennsylvania Health Access Network. Erin, thanks for taking time for us.
No problem. I wish we were here under better circumstances, but there's not many of those these days, right?
No, this is crazy. I mean, how is it possible that they're going to be able to relitigate a case that they want to take to the Supreme Court that Roberts already decided? The makeup of the court is the exact same thing. Gorsuch is in the stolen seat. But Scalia was on the same side, so there's no real change here. I'm just confused as all can be.
It's really outrageous, and it's cruel, and it's desperate, and it just shows that they failed multiple times to repeal the law because the American people aren't with them on that. There's high support, especially for protections for pre-existing conditions. So they're working through the courts. And what's really interesting about this is that in 2017, as part of the GOP tax bill, they didn't repeal the mandate. They just set the penalty at $0 beginning in 2019, and they chose to leave the insurance reforms in the Affordable Care Act in place. So doing that undercuts the argument that they're trying to make now that you can't have pre-existing condition protections without the penalty. So this is desperate. Some longtime career lawyers within the Department of Justice withdrew their names from the case. People don't think that it's going to be successful. But, people need to know that it's happening. Voters, families need to know how hard this administration continues to work to take life-saving care away from 130 million Americans and 5.3 million here in Pennsylvania.
No, I mean, I look at this and, we're now going in the wrong officially in the wrong direction. As now the number of uninsured continue to grow. And, my fear is we end up right back where we started with 52 million uninsured where we started from, and a system that is, broken. And I would argue on purpose, to push this pay or die mentality.
Oh, absolutely. And, we're really lucky in Pennsylvania that we have consumer advocate-minded people in our insurance department. So our insurance commissioner, Jessica Altman, our Secretary of Human Services, Teresa Miller, who was a former insurance commissioner, have really worked hard to do everything they can to stabilize Pennsylvania's insurance market in the face of this consistent, sustained sabotage from the administration. So in Pennsylvania, while insurance rates are rising across the country next year in 2019, in Pennsylvania they're rising by less than 5%, so less than the rate of medical inflation. And so we're lucky to have state officials and an administration that's been doing everything they can to protect people from these price spikes. This is a completely, self-inflicted wound, a man-made, a Trump-made crisis that does not need to be. The Affordable Care Act was working. It can work. Everybody always expected that in the first couple of years, as people who hadn't had any kind of care for, perhaps a decade or two were getting insured and starting to use services and maybe getting cancer diagnosed or getting diabetes under control, that costs were going to be higher. That's why the law built in stabilization for the insurance companies. So this was a very well thought out law that has been systematically picked apart by the Trump administration. And it's very important. I mean, we have elections coming up, and obviously FAN is a nonpartisan organization, but we recently, and I will let folks know about this, we this year launched the Pennsylvania Health Action Fund, and that's our C4 that can do more advocacy around legislation. And we want to make sure that we're getting the message out that people who are upset about this, who are scared, who before the Affordable Care Act couldn't sleep and stayed up nights worrying about if their child was sick, if they could take them to the doctor, if they could afford to get, that lump checked out because, God forbid, they get the diagnosis, what are they going to do about it? We need those folks to register and get out there and vote. We don't have control over what happens in the courts, but we have control over what happens in the ballot box. So people who are upset about this right now can go to our Facebook page at Pennsylvania Health Access Network, facebook.com/PA Health Access, and sign our petition to the administration. And we have a comment piece in there where folks can share their stories. And stories are the best defense that we have to tell the real human cost of this sabotage and the lives that are on the line. That, in letters to the editor, in the media, everywhere, and anywhere that we can, those stories are very important to show, the cost of this kind of sabotage.
I mean, we've had people on the program here recently. My good friend Peter Morley, who, just a fantastic patient advocate, but somebody who says, look, without the ACA, he wouldn't be around. I mean, it's this kind of life-saving insurance that gets them access to care that they wouldn't have otherwise. But here's the thing. I mean, the right wing always throws out that in this country you can go to the doctor, everyone's insured. You don't have to have this. You can just go to the hospital and they'll take care of you, Erin.
Right. And that is such a tired talking point. People, you can't get a defibrillator replaced, right? The battery replaced. We've heard stories of people dying. You can't get chemotherapy in the emergency room. And if Republicans were serious about controlling costs, they wouldn't be directing people to the emergency room, right? That is the most expensive place to get care. What's effective and what we've seen, healthcare costs were like a speeding train, and you're not going to stop it on a dime. But we've seen costs in the healthcare system start to slow under the Obama administration as people are getting insurance, as they're being able to get preventive care. I want to talk about my Aunt Donna. She's a domestic abuse survivor. She's after they got divorced, she had minimum wage jobs, filling vending machines, being a security guard, and she didn't have health insurance for about 30 years. And she was one of the first people I signed up for Medicaid expansion. I actually went over and helped her. She lives right across the border in Ohio. And that health insurance saved her eyesight. And so she was able to get to Medicare and get some really serious health conditions, identified and addressed before they exploded and had deadly consequences and very costly consequences. That was the whole point of the law, right? Getting people earlier access to treatment. That's how we bring down healthcare costs. The answer is not to just write people off and say, oh, well, go to the emergency room. That's not the answer. They know it. It's a cynical, tired talking point. And if it was their family, they have the cushion, right, to get into the parts of our healthcare system to get care.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the original argument in all of this to me is, is healthcare as access to good quality healthcare a right or is it a privilege? And this is where the dividing point is. I mean, I've yet to find many Republicans who say that it's a right, and I think that's a problem.
Well, what's really interesting is that even among Republicans and Democrats, healthcare is becoming a nonpartisan issue. People are sick to death of the ideological fights over the Affordable Care Act. Now that people have had health insurance and they see that the Obama scare that was, and all those negative attack ads funded by the insurance industry didn't come to pass, and that it was actually, health insurance that was saving people's lives. So a December 2016 poll by the Kaiser Family Foundation, which is a great source of information, kff.org, they found that 75% of Democrats and 63% of Republicans support pre-existing condition protections. That is the most popular provision of the law, much more popular than Congress. So, people are fed up with these partisan wars, right, privilege. That's a philosophical divide, but even setting that aside, even among Republicans, there's very high support for these protections. They're critical, life-saving, and they're essential to having a stable insurance market. The whole idea is to have both healthy and sick, because you never know what's going to happen, right? We all need care and different levels of care at different times, so we all pay in, and then we use services, when we need it. That's the whole theory, and that's why tax credits for people to buy insurance were so important to getting folks in there. But, this is a desperate attempt to undermine the law. We don't believe it's going to be successful in the courts, and I think a good signal is those longtime career lawyers withdrawing their names. But it just shows you how committed this administration is to taking health care away from people, and that's it's just incredible.
I'm right there with you. So what do we do? I mean, what's the answer in this? As you pointed out, Pennsylvania is doing a really good job, and I give the credit for that to our governor, Tom Wolf, who has been a champion on this issue. What do we do? I know for me personally, I want to see Tom Wolf reelected come November. The last thing we need is a baby Trump without a personality. But what do people do?
So first of all, people should be registered to vote. That's very important, no matter who you pull a lever for. If you're a healthcare voter, vote for people who are going to support your healthcare. So you can register to vote. You can go to our Facebook page, our Pennsylvania Health Action Fund, if you want to get involved more on the advocacy side and voting, Pennsylvania Health Access Network side. And especially, so go to our Facebook page, sign a petition, share your story. I also want to give out our helpline number, because one of the best things we can all do is when we meet someone who might have changed jobs or for whatever reason finds themselves uninsured, we need to help those folks get insurance. One of the best things we can do is help people enroll, whether it's through the Affordable Care Act or through Medicaid. So our helpline number is 877-570-3642. We have navigators across the state who can help people sign up for insurance. I'm glad that you brought up Governor Wolf, because what he did to simplify Medicaid expansion has been just game-changing for Pennsylvania. Almost over 700,000 Pennsylvanians have now gained access to health insurance. Medicaid is health insurance just like anything else, and it actually provides more benefits for people at a lower cost than many private plans. It's helped over 120,000 people battling opioid and other substance use disorders get treatment. So it's very important. Scott Wagner has continue to talk about wanting to do away with Medicaid expansion. So it's very important that we're active and engaged and paying attention to the conversations that are happening in D.C. and in Harrisburg about health care.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to make sure we bring up is that, in Congress, they just passed their rescission bill. And a good chunk of the money that they're clawing back is money that would go to the children's health insurance programs like the state of Pennsylvania needs.
It is, again, it's outrageous. CHIP is a wonderful program, and it helps families of all income levels if they don't have access to coverage through a job. So it's, at every turn, they're trying to take coverage away from people. And specifically this move around pre-existing conditions, it hurts older Americans, it hurts women, and it hurts any of us who have been sick in the past. And so we cannot let it stand. We have a really important chance coming up in a few months, so we need to be talking to every single person that we can, friends, family members, people who maybe don't turn out in off-year elections. Get folks registered, let them know where people stand on health care, and then let people make an informed decision.
Yeah, I as I said yesterday, if you've ever fallen, broken a leg, if you've ever had a baby, if you've ever been sick, if you've ever had surgery, if you've ever go down the list of have you ever, you have a pre-existing condition. Come November, you should be voting your pre-existing condition, because the way it looks is the Republicans, the leadership, this administration, they want to make sure that insurance companies don't have to cover you.
Absolutely. Our lives depend on it. We do not need to go back to the dark days of when insurance companies held all the cards and all the power and could pick and choose who lives and who dies.
Good stuff. Erin, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Erin Neinheiser, she's with the Pennsylvania Health Access Network. We'll make sure we get some stuff out to help if you need some there. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
We can make America better. The Rick Smith Show.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. The goal of the X Prize is to use sponsorship money and a prize system to address market failures and spur innovation in key areas, from oil cleanup to creating water from thin air. Not all X Prizes are claimed, but on Wednesday, one of them was, the Anu and Naveen Jain Women's Safety X Prize. The $1 million challenge was to build a device that triggered an inconspicuous emergency alert if a woman is threatened or attacked, and it has to work if a woman's cell phone is snatched.
People want a solution that should be independent of the smartphone and should have an audio and other stuff recording features.
That's Avinash Bansal, the operations director for Leaf Wearables, the Indian team that won the X Prize. Their device, called the Safer Pro, is a small chip that can be installed into a smartwatch or onto less noticeable pieces of jewelry. When an alert is triggered, a message and location details are sent to pre-selected guardians over Bluetooth or through a mesh network of other devices. And to boot, explains Neymarika Rajiv, an advisor to the winning team, their product is affordable at less than $40.
This product works as well as in developing countries as it would in a country like America. It is something that at a price point which is, absolutely workable for everyone.
A new Gallup poll released on Thursday asked people in 142 countries how safe they felt walking alone at night, and the results show the importance of women's safety devices. While more than 90% of those in Singapore or Norway felt safe walking alone, those numbers plummeted in Argentina and Mexico at 40%, or in Brazil and South Africa at 31%, and that includes answers from men. Leaf Wearables co-founder Manik Mehta.
If my device is with one person, and that person gets saved, it helps me sleep better.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
We want the world and we want it now. We're gonna take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
Well, it's Mueller Friday. Looks like Paul Manafort, former campaign chairman for Donald Trump, and a Russian business associate, this Konstantin Kilminnik, evidently charged today with attempting to obstruct the investigation into the Russian meddling in 2016. The obstruction charges come just a week after, or a week before, Manafort's to be back in court to see if he can remain out on house arrest. As I said, if it were any one of us, if it were you or me, they would have snatched us back, locked us up. Well, we'd have never gotten out. We'd be guests of the Gray Bar Hotel right from the start. But Manafort, free pending his trial in D.C. on money laundering and fraud. He also faces charges in Virginia on tax and bank fraud. And now throw on top of this possible witness tampering. Paul, what are you doing, man? Between now and the time they throw you back in jail, don't walk near any open windows. Because there was actually an article just the other day where someone was basically saying Manafort's going to be going into witness protection. There's no way they're going to keep him walking around, because the charges just keep piling and piling and piling. And, when you're a crooked guy, when you do a lot of crooked stuff, it kind of piles up. And I don't know how you could pardon this guy, especially since a lot of these charges are state charges. There's no pardoning there. So going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Just amazing stuff. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the big G7 summit, or really G6, with I guess the 7th there for the heck of it. We're going to come back. Dave Johnson's going to be here, former senior fellow at the Campaign for American Progress, also a fantastic writer on trade issues. We're going to bang some of that around. Quick break. Don't miss it.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1966. That was the day that the roaring of the jet age grew quiet across the United States. 35,000 members of the International Association of Mechanics went out on strike. During the strike, a large number of baggage handlers, food service workers, and other airport employees supported them on the picket lines. The mechanics worked for 5 of the nation's major airlines: Eastern, National, Northwest, Transworld, and United. The airline industry had undergone significant upgrades as it converted to the jet age. With that conversion came increased profits. By the end of 1964, the industry boasted a $500 million surplus. The mechanics felt that they were not getting a fair share of the soaring financial gains. They wanted their wages tied to the rising cost of living. There was also a holdover of bad feelings due to the acrimonious negotiations with United in 1963. With the mechanics out on strike, passengers had to scramble to make alternative travel plans. A total of 230 airports were impacted. Newspaper headlines spewed anger at the striking workers. The Wall Street Journal declared, "It is a strike against the public." Newsreel footage of the strike declared,
"At the height of the summer vacation travel season, air terminals are empty, barren caverns of space."
After 20 days, President Lyndon Baines Johnson called both sides to the White House for a sit-down. After a long negotiation session, the president announced the sides had agreed to what amounted to a 4.5% raise. But the rank-and-file strikers shocked the president and the press by rejecting the settlement. The strike continued until August 19th. The final settlement gave the mechanics a 6% raise. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united, for undivided we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters. And are you and I are win. You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets aligning, no mistaking. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, that we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind? Email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. So this morning, the Donald jumped up, tweeting out a bunch of, hey, I'm going to Canada. I'm going to the G7. And then he tweeted out yesterday that, or really early this morning, that Canada charges the U.S. 270% tariff on dairy products. He says, they didn't tell you that, did they? Not fair to our farmers. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't know that that's how you go into a diplomatic meeting, of choosing one thing and beating someone over the head. But here to share some thoughts on the G6 plus Trump summit, I've asked our good friend Dave Johnson to come talk with us. Dave is a former senior fellow at the Campaign for America's Future, also does tons of fantastic writing on trade-related issues. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So, the G6 plus Trump, thoughts?
Thoughts. The Trump approach sort of sounds like what a lot of us used to talk about, steel and all those things like that.
Right.
Trump his approach, though, is so simplistic and it's essentially so backwards from the reality of how to deal with these things that it's hard to know where to begin. His basic complaint is that countries have been unfair to us, and he points to these trade deficits that you and I have talked about. But when you and I talked about it, we talked about how the trade negotiations were conducted more in favor of America's large corporations, and that's where the middle class wages had gone to. The trade deficit with Canada, and I'm sorry, we'll get to Canada, but China, okay? And it's big.
It's enormous. It's, in my view, the biggest problem we have as a country is our trade deficit with China.
Yeah, but look where it came from. Let's just take a manufacturing plant. Closes down here. fires all the employees, packs up the tools, that they manufactured with, takes them to China, where they have no environmental protections that are enforced, really, very few labor protections, and people are paid squat. They take the same goods, they make the same goods there, they bring them back here, they sell them in the same stores, but now it's called trade because those goods cross a border. Americans have lost jobs. The Chinese people aren't particularly gaining at all because they're not paid hardly anything. They live in these bunkers, etc. But the American companies and the Wall Street investors are making out like bandits from that. And so they force other companies to do the same. And if you're going to compete, you have to do that. But it's not China particularly that is the problem as much as the trade deals that were negotiated in favor of these Wall Street and these big corporate investor types.
No, I agree with you on that. But, here's the other part of this. You still have all of the Chinese mercantilist policy of currency manipulation and industry targeting and dumping and all of this stuff that plays into it as well.
To keep that going, you bet.
So,
but a lot of it's facilitated by us. It's not that China is the particular culprit here. It's China, the billionaire class now of the Chinese leadership, in conjunction with the billionaire class of the American Wall Street investors. This has not been China taking advantage of us. This has been elements in China making deals with our own corporate trade negotiation process. That's where the problem didn't come from. China tricked us. It's not like China tricked us.
Oh no, I've never said China ever tricked us.
Yeah.
Everything
point.
I've always said is, look, we used to make, when I was a kid, I had all kind of toys that were all made in the U.S. I had a bicycle, it was made in the U.S. Basically everything I had growing up as a youngster was all made in the U.S. We still have those same products today.
Hey,
they're just made somewhere else. And
right,
it wasn't.
You're so right. You're so right. And that's what they call the hollowing out of America's middle class. But the benefits from that, our GDP grows, actually. They always say, trade's good because the GDP grows, all that stuff. Well, wait a minute. This is very wealthy people in America are now pocketing those middle class wages.
Right.
And some billionaires in China. So it's not that the Chinese, if you want to lump them all together and say the Chinese tricked us and out-negotiated us. No, it was these trade deals have almost always been negotiated entirely in favor of the American corporate class that has, what they call captured the process. So the idea that Trump says we've been tricked and so we're going to go after these other countries is just simply the wrongest way to look at it, because the result then is that he shuts down a lot of the things that then still keep a lot of stuff here going. The way he hit steel, and we'll get to Canada and stuff in a minute, the way he hits those things is not particularly going to help here. It'll help a bit, but then on the other hand, the users of steel now have had to lay off tons of people and such.
Have we seen that? I know that's been
I
know that's been the talking point, Dave. But have we actually seen that happen? Because look, you're talking such a small amount of increase in the steel cost, and the tariffs haven't even actually hit really yet. So I mean,
just today I was up talking to a guy who has a plumbing supply company, and he said about a minute after those tariffs were announced, all his suppliers raised their prices 25%.
Yeah, but that wasn't because any of the inputs cost them any more. That's because they saw a good opportunity.
Of course. But so what has happened, and remember how it was announced. It was just suddenly, this is what we're going to do. There was no rollout. There was no planning. People in his own administration didn't even know he was going to do this.
Yeah.
Instead of having a process, a phase-in, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so, I mean, it's good. We needed to do, especially the steel, especially steel because of national security concerns as well. We have to rebuild our American steel manufacturing. But usually you would follow some kind of a process, and you'd do this and you'd do that. There would be a series of things, and you'd start getting people ready for it. Another example, I have a friend who has a solar company installation, a big one. And this tariff thing is killing them, okay? Now, it might trigger, I mean, we really needed to do something about solar and start getting solar manufacturing back to the United States. But now they've thrown a monkey wrench into the entire solar installation process, including, you know, all the supplies that you build, the support things that you put the solar panels on and all of that,
right?
Which are, you know, steel and aluminum and all of that. So
let me ask you
so
this,
instead
because-
of phasing it in.
No,
and
because,
yes,
you know,
by the way, we are getting more solar panel manufacturing started slowly, but not enough and not fast enough.
Well, we tried that, you know, during the Obama years, and the Republicans all point to Solyndra, a huge failure. But we tried to get the manufacturing done here. It's just that we allowed the Chinese to dump into our market. And the question then becomes for me is, you know, fine, you know, is the goal to have the cheapest possible products, or is the goal to have domestic consumption in domestic production? I mean, at some point, you've got to define what it is you're looking at, because you're saying, you know, and I've had these discussions numerous times with people who say, well, you know, it's hurting this business because it's increasing the cost. And I go, okay, but if we made that stuff here to begin with, you would have those jobs here, you would have a supply chain, and you wouldn't be harming them. So how do you get, since we all agree our manufacturing base has been hollowed out, how do we get back to a point to where we are producing things and it is helping industry here to grow and thrive, like your friend who owns the solar installation company? How do you get from one to the other? Because there's going to be some frictional pain that we have to adjust to, I think, on some level.
But you can mitigate that pain is the point, and you can plan, and you can have a process. In fact, this is what Obama did try to do, was to try to have this process. He failed in a lot of ways, especially, you know, he wouldn't label China as a currency manipulator.
And neither has Trump, which he was supposed to do day one.
Yeah, exactly. He promised he'd do it day one, and then he didn't. Yeah, Trump talks a good game, you know.
No, I'm with you. You know, and at the end of this, you know, what you have to try and figure out how to deal with is how you move this forward. And you know, like I was saying here, the thing that's kind of frustrating is, you know, I keep hearing that same story over and over and over again. I keep getting hammered with that. Well, you know, you're hurting this producer, you're hurting that producer, and I'm going, well, or this installer, and I go, well, you know, maybe that's the case, but how do we get back that manufacturing? How do we claw that back? Steel production, for instance, to me is hugely important, because you seriously have to have you know, the capacity to produce steel if you're going to have a war machine. And we're a war society. We want war stuff. So how do you get to the point to where you go, okay, you know, we're going to encourage domestic production of steel, and it might cost a couple of pennies more. We may have to pay a penny more for a 6-pack. We may have to pay for, you know, an extra, you know, 10 cents for the stuff that you're going to use to put the solar panels on the roof. You may have to do that. But the reverberation effect of the jobs that are coming in that are being created by having that manufacturing base and not being dependent on a foreign nation, you know, to me is well worth it. And Dave, I appreciate the thoughts. I think we lost him. This is another reason I hate cell phones. But you know, you go down this and you look at the reality in all of this, and to me, the idea of having these tariffs, I've been talking about for years. Do I think Trump's going to do it right? No, I fear he boogers everything up, and I fear that, you know, in looking at what happens this weekend, and he's going to do nothing this weekend but tick off the other 6 and end up having it be a G6, with us looking in through the window. And at some point, again, I go back to, I agree with the idea. The way he's doing it to me is just nuts. This idea that you're going to go after Canada, really? Is that the move? Even though we don't have I think we actually have a trade surplus with Canada. When China is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And if you look at the amount, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in deficits. You know, the one time I actually sat down and I went back from when Clinton gave China permanent normal trade relation status. And I added up all of the trade deficit numbers. Just add up all of the trade deficits we've had, not just with China, but all around the world. And interestingly enough, at the time when I did it, and this was back during the middle of the Obama years, interestingly enough, it was almost the same number that was our budget debt, the amount of money that. So we had basically deficited ourselves into debt. And you go back to, I guess it was 1975 is when I went back to all of the trade deficits we've had going forward with the rest of the world, and it mirrored how much money we were in debt to ourselves and to other countries. Because at the end of this, and this is one of those things that you have to understand, that the dollar is the reserve currency of the globe. Every dollar that's spent on an international item, that dollar has to come back here. So if we're buying widgets and whatnots and toys and trinkets and gadgets and all of that stuff from China or whoever, that money has to come back here in one form or another. So if it's buying our treasuries, if it's buying municipal bonds, if it's going through our banking system, and propping up bad home loans, or if it's buying our companies and packing them up and shipping them back, that money has to come back. And it's one of the downsides of having the reserve currency. And I've talked about this before. Back when all of this was set up, when the Bretton Woods Accord and the entire trade regime that we've been living under for the last 1944 was when the Bretton Woods Accord happened. When all that was set up, and we demanded we want the dollar as the reserve currency, John Maynard Keynes wanted a floating currency. Wanted a global currency. He wanted to call it the Bancor. And the idea is that you would have a leveling of trade. No one would have a surplus. No one would have a deficit. Surplus countries would pay the deficit countries, and you would have a leveling off. And that trade would be done the way it was meant to be done, that you traded for things that you couldn't produce. Not that you would have one producer country, and I know there's the rice and beans argument, but not that you would have one producer country who produced everything. You would have balanced trade. And if you didn't, you'd have a country that had a massive deficit. Well, that country that had the massive surplus would be paying the deficit country so that you could have transfer payments to mitigate the negativity of job loss and of decline, because you need consumers. And Keynes understood this. You needed consumers. You needed people to buy stuff. So if you're in a country like we're in right now that's in a massive deficit, eventually at some point those deficits grow so large that you can't consume anymore. And the problem is that once that happens, now you gum up the entire system. You have oversupply. You end up in a depression. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but this is what happens when you have this kind of massive imbalance. And while I don't agree with what Trump is doing, how he's doing it, I agree that it has to be done. I was really disappointed with Donald Trump in a lot of ways, in that, you just couldn't figure out how to get it done. I guess we got Dave back on the line. Dave, you there?
Yeah. I thought you'd call me, so I was waiting.
Yeah. So we
sorry, I don't know what happened.
Cell phones are horrible. So where were we? I wanted to finish up.
I wanted to answer. You said the thing about that steeper prices are not a justification for these trade deals. I got to agree with you so much. It's almost immoral to say that we get lower prices. But how many millions of people lose their jobs to get those lower prices? And then the jobs, as you were just saying, by the way, I was checking the live feed. The jobs, if you're not paid enough, or if you don't have a job, you can't buy anything at any price anyway. So, do you want to get to Canada at all?
Yeah, I do. I wanted. That was the point of all of this, to get to the G6 plus one.
So, Canada, here we are. I mean, trade war with Canada, and not just a trade war, but he's like really going after Canada, which is kind of shocking. I don't understand it. Nobody understands it. He goes after France. He goes after Germany. His only friends are these strongman dictator types.
Of which he wants to bring Putin back into the G7.
that was shocking. I mean, I can't imagine how people there. The reasons that Putin was invited into the G7 as a courtesy, not because they have a major economy. Their economy is about the size of Italy. Now, Italy was there. The guy had just been sworn in, this week or last week? But that's why Putin was there. And then he annexes Crimea. You haven't heard the word annex since World War II,
Yep.
And the behavior of the country, the oligarch kleptocracy system of theft and everything else was why they kicked him out. Trump says, let's bring him back in. No, what do you get from them? What concession on the things they got kicked out for do you get if you're going to bring Russia back in? You don't just bring Russia back in, I mean, you get something for it. God, it makes me terrified of what's going to happen in Korea, Singapore.
No, I'm with you. The Harris Summit is
Canada, going after Canada. So he complains that they have dairy, high tariffs on their dairy industry. Let's look at our American farming industry for a minute. One of the complaints that you and I have had about these trade deals has been that the American mega corporations, it enables them to just go start wiping everything out here and there. But, they wipe the jobs out here, but they have these huge mechanized farms, and then you have a cultural attachment to certain things, like especially small agriculture in places like France. Canada has family farms. Canada has dairies, okay? We have these giant mega monopoly situations with the GMOs, the whole thing we do. We have already pretty much succeeded in wiping out America's family farms and farming culture.
Except when we want to talk about the estate tax.
Exactly. And the estate tax has never applied to a farm, but that's another story. Exactly. And so Canada wants to have, culturally and other reasons, a dairy industry in Canada. And if they let us just immediately come in, what would happen in Canada is what happened in northern Mexico to small family farms growing corn and stuff after NAFTA took effect. And what happened was our giant American corporations with our giant subsidies, we subsidize dairy and corn and stuff, a lot. Yeah.
You're not allowed to say that.
What happened to Mexico was that we put so many of these northern farmers out of business, they had to find a way to make a living. You know what they started doing? Mass migration north.
Right.
Which is Trump's biggest complaint, right?
Yep.
Well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to the small farms in Canada if Canada can't protect its cultural, there's things that countries are proud of. And Canada is proud that they have these dairy farms, et cetera, like Vermont and stuff. So that's an issue that isn't brought up here. And Trump focuses, as you said, on that one thing, the dairy. But we do not have trade problems with our largest trading partner in the world. And here comes Trump. And why? Usually trade is a congressional prerogative, okay? But Trump has taken over this, and he is kind of dictatorially imposing tariffs, and his justification with Canada, this, but and it's funny, was that national security reasons we have to slap huge steel tariffs and stuff on Canada, right? Does that really make sense? I mean, you know what Leo Gerard says about, wait a minute, Canada? Wait a minute, what are we doing slapping tariffs on Canada?
Yeah, that's because John Bolton said that Canada might bomb us in 100 years.
Yeah, right. But what Trump said was, well, you burned down the White House in the War of 1812. Well, actually, Canada didn't burn down the White House. England did before there was a Canada. And
details.
What would happen if you asked Trump what year was the War of 1812?
That's almost like asking someone who's in Grant's tomb.
Yeah, exactly. So justifying it on national security grounds, and it's like shocking how much he is trying to split apart America's alliances while saying we should be working with Putin and other dictators around the world. So that's what I wanted to say about the situation with Canada. Yeah, and then look what we've done with France. He's in a public Twitter war Well, never mind, by the way, publicly Twitter insulting the Prime Minister of Canada. He's insulting the President of France on Twitter and such, getting into these wars. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I mean, but this is just another day in 2018. I mean, there's nothing new here, nothing to see. Move along.
I know. And in an hour we'll be talking about something else, you know.
So the
trade situation.
Right.
Trump talks a good game on trade.
Yeah.
Sure. It sounds like he's saying the right things, but the details kill us. And because he doesn't understand the details, I don't think. Or
no,
what?
absolutely
I'm
not.
Sure.
He just he wants to win, and that's it. But the last question I want to get to, because you look at how disjointed everything is, and I'm guessing there's no NAFTA deal coming, and all of this kind of chaos. I do think at some point the world does unite against us, and in different factions, and that's not a good place to be in.
That's part of what it looks like is happening. Europe has started to say, we're going to have to go on our own. They're starting to write us out of things. That includes intelligence sharing things and stuff too. It's dangerous long term for us. That's part of what's happening. They tried to reach a consensus on a process for agreement on trade violations, and Trump blew it up today, for example. So they still say they're going to issue a joint statement, but Trump is leaving early to skip all of the environmental and climate discussion that they're going to have. So we'll see what comes out of it.
Yeah, I mean, how can he stay for that? Honestly, in good conscience, how can he stay for the environmental part when you've got Scott Pruitt, who is doing everything he can do to take us back to the 60s and 70s?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
so here we are.
It's really scary stuff.
It sounds good, but if you know what you're talking about and you go beyond the slogans, it's really scary.
Yeah.
I'm
sure that
I don't see us heading towards a better trade regime from this.
No, I don't either, but I'm sure the other six are happy he's leaving.
Well, one thing you should know, remember Fast Track and our big fight on Fast Track? Well, Fast Track expires. Trump's Fast Track authority expires, I believe it's July 1st. But it keeps going unless Congress issues a resolution opposing keeping it going. That's written into it.
Yeah, another one of those.
So if Congress if they really want to take over their proper role that Congress is supposed to have, like oversight and such, if they really wanted to take it over, all they have to do is those Republicans that are talking about, being for better approaches to trade, they're all for the wrong approaches, but at least they're talking about how Trump's nuts. They could just vote a resolution right now and say Fast Track expires. They could do that.
Again, another reason I was against Fast Track from the beginning anyway.
Yeah. What do you think the odds are they'll do that?
Yeah, so we'll see where it takes us. We'll see if the world ends on Monday, and we'll go from there. Dave, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Always good talking to our good friend Dave Johnson. Look, I'm sure the other six cannot wait for Trump to leave early, go play golf or whatever it is. I know he's not gonna prepare for the hair summit. He's already said he's as prepared as he's gonna be. It's about attitude. Wow. Right back.
It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
The biggest primary night of the year with the most critical contest in California.
California voters choose climate action at the polls.
Even if this had been Scott Pruitt sending this EPA staffer out to get his wife a Chick-fil-A sandwich, that itself would be illegal under federal law.
Yet another ethics scandal for EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. Federal judge orders EPA to cough up scientific evidence that humans are not driving climate change. Plus,
so the bottom line is preventing global warming is good business.
Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Accord could cost the U.S. economy trillions.
Fantastic. All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Oh, science, you fickle mistress. No wonder so many people don't believe in you. Let's get this thing started.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, a lot of folks watching the primary elections in California over the past week as Democrats hope to regain the U.S. House, but there were also some very important ballot measures at stake in the California election as well.
Exactly. On Tuesday, 8 states held primaries for that crucial November 2018 midterm election, and there were strong showings for progressive and Democratic candidates who all pledged to act on climate change and protect the environment and grow clean energy jobs. But as you say, in California, climate action was also on the ballot. A statewide ballot initiative posed by Republican state lawmakers would have blocked the state from spending billions of dollars in revenue from California's successful cap and trade carbon emissions program until 2024. And it would have required approval from 2/3 of the legislature to get any projects going.
So basically, money coming in to the state from this cap and trade program, and the Republicans had a scheme to try and tie up all of that money from being spent.
To block it entirely. But voters resoundingly rejected that, and instead they chose to pass separate initiatives expanding outdoor recreation, land conservation and water projects, and repairing transportation infrastructure.
Little wonder Republicans are now on the endangered species list themselves out here in California.
And meanwhile, yet another new scandal to add to the already long list for Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt. Internal emails show that Pruitt enlisted top EPA staffers to do personal errands for him on the government's time, a violation of federal law, like helping him try to get a Chick-fil-A franchise set up for his wife, finding him an apartment in D.C., and this one's kind of weird, obtaining a used Trump Hotel luxury mattress for him. That aide resigned on Wednesday.
I'm not sure what's weirder, that used mattress from the Trump Hotel or trying to get his wife a Chick-fil-A franchise.
Pruitt's EPA also lost in court this week. The chief judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia ordered the EPA to cough up scientific research to support Pruitt's claims in media interviews that he believes humans are not the primary driver of global warming. The judge called it, quote, particularly troubling that the EPA refused to fulfill a public records request and show a scientific basis for Pruitt's assertion, and instead the EPA claimed the question of whether humans are responsible for climate change is, quote, unknowable. Needless to say, the global scientific community disagrees.
And apparently, so does the court. Thank God we still have them.
Meanwhile,
the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
This week marked 1 year since President Trump announced his intention to withdraw from the historic United Nations Paris Climate Agreement. But according to a new study from Stanford University, abandoning the Paris climate deal would cost the U.S. economy trillions of dollars in damages for things like extreme weather disasters and rising sea levels. The study found that meeting the Paris Agreement's emissions targets would save the global economy about $20 trillion in avoided economic losses, and in the U.S. alone, it would save the U.S. economy $6 trillion. In an interview with CBS, climate economist Noah Diefenbaugh explained that the cost of transitioning away from fossil fuels is vastly outweighed by the benefits.
We find that not only most countries are likely to benefit, but the United States is likely to benefit when we compare the cost of achieving the lower levels of global warming with the damage that will be avoided. It turns out to be a very large return on investment.
They calculate that every $1 we spend to decarbonize returns $10 to $30 in economic benefits. It's important to note that the study does not account for the loss of market share from failing to keep up with the rest of the world as it transitions away from fossil fuels.
So everyone benefits, everyone that is, except Donald Trump, because Fox News told him that climate change was a hoax. And he's got to keep up the lie. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
What does the fox say? What the fox say?
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. My good friend Jeff Bryant has a really good piece on, how this primary season has shown that, some of the people who won pushing back against charter schools, and how maybe now the not just Democrats but also some Republicans are looking at just how bad these charter schools have been, and maybe taking a second look at how our education system is being, I would argue, destroyed systematically, so that we could create a massive crisis and then privatize the whole thing, which is why I think in West Virginia and in Kentucky and in Arizona and Oklahoma, we saw the kind of organizing that we've seen, this starving of public education, and finally teachers saying, enough is enough. It's about time. That's why I've asked Brian Arnicher to come talk with us. He's an Oklahoma teacher, one of the folks out in the streets, and also a member of the Badass Teachers Association. Brian, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So, I look at, what you guys did in Oklahoma, and, to me, it's maybe what the post-Janus world looks like of direct action and the end of labor peace. But more importantly, it's finally the more articulate union members and more articulate workers saying, we've been screwed long enough. We demand better.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think in Oklahoma, we're, at the forefront. We've been fighting this battle for over 10 years now. And I think we are seeing, it's time for massive change to happen. I think we're losing way too many teachers. There's not enough young teachers coming into the profession, and I think we're definitely in crisis mode.
Now, I look at a state like Oklahoma, and some of the pictures you guys tweeted out during the strike of the conditions under which you guys, as maybe not you, but teachers in your state labor under: broken chairs, broken desks, books with chapters missing, and just all of the stuff that you wouldn't expect in this country. You might expect in a third world nation somewhere, but not here at home. And I think there's kind of an eye-opening, kind of an awakening going on.
Yeah, definitely. There's kind of an awakening going on. I think with social media, it allows teachers, to actually have a voice and actually post some images from their classrooms. And, I think a lot of people don't understand, what some of these teachers are facing on kind of a daily basis. And that's why I think, social media has been a valuable tool to kind of help get some of these images out into the public eye and see what these teachers are facing on a daily basis.
Yeah. So now, obviously, school's over, summertime. Where did things end up, and will this continue into the new year? I mean, we saw that there was some movement forward. The question is, how much of that do they claw back in the future? I'm curious where you see things going.
Well, I think right now the big push is, getting ready for the primaries. We've got a couple, major ballot initiatives on there, as well as, looking at some candidates that, teachers are definitely out supporting. And I think that's kind of been the big push recently to get, voters registered, to get, people out to the polls. So that's going to be, I think, going to be the next big push. But we're also kind of facing, the Tom Coburn's, attack on the teacher raises. So, we've got the petition, to kind of void all that effort. So it's definitely, I think, getting momentum into the polls.
Yeah, we had while you guys were on strike and during the build-up, we had a couple of teachers from Oklahoma on the program back then. And what was surprising to me is, the couple that we had on, they had self-identified as Republicans, and I'm going, how is it that you could be in the employment that you're in, doing what you're doing, and still self-identify as a Republican? How is that possible? And, you know, there wasn't really a good argument, a good answer, but it's because it seems to me they almost shot themselves in the foot before they decided it was time to march in the streets.
Yeah, well, and the thing, you know, for me, you know, I'm actually a registered independent, so I'm kind of, you know, I've got friends on both sides of the aisle. You know, and I don't know, I didn't get into teaching to get into politics. You know, it's one of the things that, you know, I wasn't a fan of politics to begin with, and I'm still not, but, you know, I know it's an important part of the process, you know, so it's definitely, it's perplexing sometimes, you know, for some of the policies that are being pushed, you know, the teachers are, you know, I don't know that, but I think, you know, this whole movement is getting a lot more people politically engaged, you know, and I think we're going to see, you know, good turnouts at the polls.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. I mean, look, I go back to, you know, my eighth grade government teacher, and it's been a long time since that happened. But he said, look, you may not like politics, but everything is politics because government decides who gets what. And what government in your state and in many other states, even where I'm at in Pennsylvania, what they've decided is that corporations and the very wealthy get a lot and our kids not so much.
Right. And I think what we're seeing too, you know, right now, you know, the unions are negotiating for teachers' raises. You know, we're still looking at, you know, trying to fund these mandates, and a lot of the districts are going to be put in harm's way. And, you know, mine in particular, you know, said, all right, we're on for about 70% of what was promised, but other than that, we really don't know yet. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty with what's getting ready to happen. And what we're seeing currently is, I think the mass exodus is continuing. Even though the promises of the raises are out there, teachers are still leaving. You know, I noticed today that, well, I'm getting ready to have my son's getting ready to go into kindergarten, and at a pretty nice public school, and they've got vacancies, you know, there as well. So it's all over. I think TPS posted that, Tulsa Public Schools posted that they've got like 300 vacancies. Wow. You know, it's going to be, you know, pretty major. And, you know, if you're, you know, at a small high school, you know, and you're, you know, you've got 4 people that you need to fill spots for, that could be, you know, 10% of your staff, if not more. And, you know, I think a lot of these, you know, districts were pushing for the teachers to sign contracts early, but a lot of people are, you know, bailing out. So they're saying enough's enough. And, you know, I'm already seeing reports of people moving to Texas. They're going to, you know, Arkansas, you know, and when they can offer, you know, $15,000 to $20,000 more for a veteran teacher to move across the borders, you know, it's, you know, they're only going to stay here for so long. Yeah. And, you know, it's just a matter of time.
And then you end up with, you know, with less experienced teachers, and you end up with a system that struggles. I mean, because look, you know, while you love the energy of a new teacher fresh out of school, they're not nearly as honed in their craft as someone who's spent 5 or 10 years doing it. So if you lose those teachers who have the experience, you also lose the mentors. And I just don't. Again, it seems so short-sighted to me that the state would do this and pursue this kind of policy.
Well, there's got to be another agenda there, and you know, I think we're seeing, you know, we don't have enough young teachers going into the profession. I think that at OU they were graduating, I think, 30 teachers, and the majority of them are going back to Texas. I think over 50%. So you had 15 go to Texas. You had a lot of them that were getting out of education. I think only 3 were staying, so they only had 10% of what they graduated, you know, just recently, or actually sticking around and going to teach. But you're only looking at 3 teachers. So
are you surprised by
that? There's a lot more vacancy.
Yeah, I mean, are you surprised by that? Because, you know, look, even in a state that pays reasonably well, like Pennsylvania does, the attacks and the you know, just the constant, you know, arrows of greedy teacher, of bad teacher, of lazy teacher. Well, you know, you go down the list, and I'm sure you've heard them all. You know, I can't imagine throw on top of that poverty-ridden teacher. You know, why you'd want to do it is beyond me.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, it's gotten to the point where, you know, enough's enough, and they can only sacrifice so much, and, you know, they're not getting in it for the benefit of the kids anymore. They're done, you know, and when people have their own kids to take care of, you know, that's got to be the first priority. And, you know, I think that's what we're going to see is, you know, the parents are, you know, they're tired of taking care of other people's kids, you know, and that's the reality that, you know, you got to protect your own kids first. So.
Yeah, and
I
there's some
don't
of the
know.
stories that I've heard, because we have teachers on all the time, because I think it's important, because what you guys do, I think, is one of the most important jobs in this country, and it's not just pandering and blowing smoke. Is you're honing the future of this country. You're honing the future critical thinkers, the future citizens in this country, and I guess looking at how we treat teachers and how we treat education as a whole. Tells me that the people who are in charge don't think an awful lot of the future.
No, well, I think what we can look at too is look at the numbers and the cuts that have happened towards the gifted and talented students. We're not, we're taking care of our best and brightest students anymore. We're just looking at, let's put them into a trade, let's put them into VOTech, which is fine, but at the expense of, your leadership. And that's the thing that, when you lose, it's just, the typical dumbing down of America. And I think we are, we've got to really rethink about, what we're doing with our future leaders, and it's great to have, a trained workforce, and college is not for everybody. I realize that, but at what expense? So I don't know. We're losing a lot of opportunities for kids.
And the sad thing is it shouldn't depend on where you live. And what your zip code is, but it seems more and more that whether you move into the middle class or any advantages is basically on where your parents ended up living and raising you, and that's kind of a sad thing.
Well, it's just going to be a tough deal, and then you got.
So let me ask you this, because the fall's coming up real soon. Do you expect the kind of organizing that you saw this spring? Do you expect that to continue into the fall? I mean, because there's part of me that goes, the fact that the teachers got out, they were organized, they tasted a little bit of victory, they tasted a little bit of power and making their conditions better. I hope that this moves forward. Do you see that happening? I guess so. No, but I look at this, and as I said, again, another reason I hate cell phones. But Brian, I appreciate the time. Thank you. But here's the thing, I look at the organizing that went on. I look at the energy that they had, and it was just kind of amazing. Just kind of amazing. And I guess we got Brian back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Last question I've got for you, because it was about moving into the future. Do you expect the kind of passion, the kind of organizing that you had going on here in the spring to continue into the fall, or do you see people going, hey, we got something, we're gonna be happy and move forward? How do you see things playing out?
Well, it really depends on a couple things. I think the June primaries are going to be critical, and to see if we can get some candidates who are definitely pro-education. Even though they won't have officially won the races yet, if we can get some pro candidates, on the ballot, I think that'll be a positive move, and I think people will wait that out, see what happens in November. But then again, if you have the petition that basically rescinds, these raises, teachers, I think, are going to be to the point where enough's enough. They're either not going to come back in the fall, either they're going to find new positions in other fields, or personally, we could see another strike, and not come back in the fall. And that could be a whole nother set of issues. I think, personally, 2 weeks was not enough. And I think a lot of teachers were let down when, the walkout abruptly ended. There were people planning on coming up the next day, and then, we got notification that it's over. Well, I don't think we accomplished enough to begin with. So, there's possibility of another walkout.
Yeah.
So,
now, was that because your union called it? Or, how did that process happen?
Well, the union called it because they're kind of the centralized, negotiating body for the teachers. But and everyone was kind of following their lead. So I don't know. There were a lot of unhappy union members that dropped their membership. So, and there's a lot of people, I think, that still wanted to see a little bit more. So it's going to be, interesting to see which forces come at play, because you got a couple different unions, you got a couple independent groups going. So this fall could get real interesting, real fast.
No, I mean, it's most certainly something that we will be keeping an eye on, and I hope as things develop, you'll come back and share what's going on and share your experiences with us.
Definitely.
Brian, I appreciate the time. Keep up the good fight and have a good summer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. Brian Ironacher. He's an Oklahoma teacher there, also a member of the Badass Teachers Association. Our good friends there and good folks. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1904. That was the day that John Carley, a union miner, was shot down in Dunnville, Colorado. Carley was part of a strike in the Cripple Creek gold mining region. The miners had gone out on strike in support of workers at the Standard Mill in Colorado City, which processed the mined ore. Colorado Governor Peabody was determined to break the strike. He called in the state militia, who joined forces with company Army gun thugs, with 1,000 rifles and 60,000 rounds of ammunition to back them up. General Sherman Bell, a veteran of Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Rider Squad in the Spanish-American War, led the National Guard. During the strike, one of General Bell's deputies is said to have declared, "To hell with the Constitution! We aren't going by the Constitution." This pretty much summed up General Bell's approach to the conflict. The militia began to round up Union miners. More than 1,500 miners were captured and given a so-called trial by the militia. 238 of these miners were then deported from the region. They were shipped by train to Denver, Kansas, and New Mexico, and warned not to return. The militia learned of a group of pro-union workers at a small encampment known as Dunnville. General Bell loaded up more than 100 militiamen and company deputies on a train and headed for the camp. There they exchanged gunfire with the miners. 65 miners, armed with just 10 guns among them, had little chance against the well-armed company men. John Carley was killed, and 14 miners were arrested. The Union was crushed in the sights of 1,000 guns. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists bound to lose?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So today, a sad day. One of the guys I always watch the Parts Unknown because it was an interesting show, and I liked Anthony Bourdain. The sad reality is today it appears that he committed suicide, age 61. The report that I saw, apparently he hung himself. And you go, this is on the days. Just the other day, a woman designer, she committed suicide. Evidently, was having health issues or mental health issues. And you go, at some point in this country, we've got to make sure that people get. And while it's these celebrities that get the attention, sadly, there are people struggling with mental illness and struggling with problems, and it's just tragic, and it's tragic that these lives can be saved, and it's just tragic on so many levels. I don't know where else you go with that other than our thoughts and all of that. But you look at this and you go, what drives someone who has everything. He's got at the height of his career. He evidently was staying in a five-star hotel, and who knows what goes between people's ears. It's really, really, really tragic. And, to his family, the thoughts and all that, scary stuff. And this, takes me back to, you look at some of the studies that I've seen, and I think part of what is frustrating is that I remember a study that I had read a couple of years back, and I think I alluded to this last night. It was a study out of the UK that came out and said, whenever conservative governments take over, they push, kind of draconian, angry, hateful policies, and that society has really a reaction to that. As the study, as I remember it, as conservative governments went and cut food stamp programs and assistance programs, as life became harder to make it to the next day, suicide rates went up. And it makes perfect sense that if you're struggling, if your family's struggling, we saw a lot of this back when deindustrialization was going on, in Cleveland, in places like Cleveland and Pittsburgh and Detroit, as those industries were going away and there were no jobs, unemployment was through the roof. Men were going off and killing themselves so that the family would have insurance money. That kind of mean-spirited policy. And I'm not saying that this had anything to do with Anthony Bourdain. I don't know if it did or not. I don't know his demons. But for those other people out there, the millions of other people who are struggling and are trying to figure out how to make it to tomorrow, it's those policies that help contribute to this, in my view. And look, like I said, there are studies that they did in the UK. We would never do those studies here because we don't want to know. But you have to wonder, for your neighbors and your family members, how much of this is the policy, how much of this is we're going to gut food stamps, we're going to take, we had a woman on the show about a month ago, who was really freaking out about the end of the children's health insurance program because her children are sick, and the kind of stress that put on them and their family. And you go through and you look at this stuff, and you go down the list. If you're struggling to get food assistance or heating assistance or the rent assistance, and we now find that fortunately Ben Carson is pulling away from tripling the cost for low income folks for housing assistance. But you go down the list of all this stuff and the amount of stress and pressure and constant attack that folks feel from our government and the policymakers. Also, we can give a couple more dollars to a billionaire. Also, that they can have a bigger tax cut. Also, they can have another loophole to funnel money through, or another offshore account that they can evade paying their taxes to. And for me, the scary part in this, and whenever this stuff comes up, I think about my own mother, who, when she passed, no one knew if it was an accident. No one knew if it was suicide or if someone had murdered her. And to this day, no one knows. But there was depression there. We were on the verge of being homeless. And I remember the stress that she was under. And I don't want to see that for anyone. So, whenever these things come up, it gets my mind thinking in those directions. And it's sad and it's tragic. So that's about all I can add to that, sadly. Anyway, the next week and I can't believe this happened, but anytime I plan a vacation, and we planned this a long time ago, anytime I plan a vacation, the world comes to an end. But the big summit on Tuesday, cannot wait for that. We'll be back after next week to hammer through and pick up where we left off. Next week, what we're going to be playing is the Civil Rights Tour, so you're not going to want to miss those. I'm really proud of the shows that we did on our Civil Rights Tour, and the stories that we got from people, and some of them were heartbreaking, some of them were encouraging. So I highly suggest tune in, listen to those shows, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great week.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like tide flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.